Welcome to Redacted Night VIP. I'm Lee Camp, and the fight continues. Today, I talk with Pulitzer Prize winner and host of the show On Contact, Chris Hedges. He's also the author of many best-selling books like Death of the Liberal Class, Empire of Illusion, and Wages of Rebellion. Empire of Illusion, one of my favorites. Incredible book. We'll get into the Democratic primaries, the coronavirus, Julian Assange, a lot more, and what all of those things say about the tenuous rule of our completely out of control and out of touch oligarchs. I'll also be talking with journalist Jordan Chariton, who has been on the ground in the primary states talking to voters and politicians. But without further intro and without further ado, here's my conversation with Chris Hedges. Chris, thank you so much for joining me again.
Yeah, Lee.
Honored to have you here. So, we've got chaos in multiple areas of the country right now, but as Bernie Sanders' movement got stronger and stronger, we've seen the establishment and the oligarchs, circle the wagons, get together and support Joe Biden as the solution to what Bernie Sanders has created. You wrote in your latest TruthDig column that either way, in November, the people will only get one choice. Can you talk more about that?
Right. So, of course, they feed us the least worst option. Hillary Clinton, John Kerry. But that only works for us. Lloyd Blankfein, all these other Democratic heavy hitter donors have been publicly saying in the New York Times and other publications that if Bernie is the nominee, they support Trump. So there's no least worst option for them. This is clearly for the rubes.
Right.
That's number one. And that's because although they find Trump an embarrassment and repugnant, they can live with him. They'd rather have Biden, but the core issue...
Wall Street's no more regulated under Trump.
Right.
So.
They know that Biden's a known quantity. He's a tool of the credit card companies, a cheerleader for the Iraq War, one of the architects of mass incarceration, has series of proposals to slash Social Security. He's one of them. And so the only, the title of it was the one choice election because it's who's going to manage the corporate state. It's either Biden or Trump. And I am very critical of Sanders in the piece because Sanders believed that that the Democratic Party functions as a real political party, which it doesn't, and that he could, even though I think there's a strong case that the election in 2016 was stolen from him through a series of dirty mechanisms, which probably most of your viewers know, but stealing the Nevada caucus, not allowing independents to vote, which is a huge segment, erasing rolls over 300,000 in New York State alone, using the DNC as a mechanism for the Clinton campaign, and then of
laundering the money.
Laundering the money, exactly, that's right. So, and Sanders got to the convention. I was actually there with Cornel West. We were with a march of homeless people outside the appropriately named Wells Fargo Center. And you had several hundred Bernie delegates and supporters walk out at the night that Bernie got up to propose Clinton, endorse Clinton as the nominee. And I think he missed his historical moment. I think he should have walked out.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to build an effective political resistance in one election cycle, and we're not going to build it within the Democratic Party. What did Sanders do? He went back to the Senate. He became Chuck Schumer's water boy, basically. He'd be in the back
of with Tom Perez,
director of outreach or some bullshit title. And he, of course, caucused with the Democrats. He endorsed all sorts of neoliberal candidates that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi wanted elected. And he thought, I think, that if he was a good party apparatchik, they would give him a chance. Well, they haven't given him a chance. Right. It's the same dirty tricks. And I think what we're going to see from now on, of course, everybody has lined up behind Biden, who's I think Trump will beat. But what we're going to see, and maybe one of the first salvos of that was in the New York Times last Friday with this ridiculous article about Bernie having a sister city in Russia.
It's disgusting.
I mean, this is the time of Gorbachev and openness, and I mean, Reagan and Gorbachev were friends. I mean, it's crazy. But it was just classic red baiting. They are going to pile on Sanders. It is going to be so vicious. And the media, of course, MSNBC, all these quote unquote, liberal, CNN outlets, will just make him a figure of derision and ridicule. And I think this was really Sanders' greatest mistake. So yeah, we're once again going to be offered? Who do we want to oversee the corporate totalitarian anti-democratic system that is bipartisan, that both parties have put in place?
Everything you mentioned that happened in 2016, in terms of rigging it against Bernie Sanders, happened again, basically, or is happening again, including some new ones, such as the Shadow app created by former Clinton staffers to turn Iowa into a shit show so that they could, not say Bernie won it. And on top of that, the voting machines, completely black box. They seem to always go against the exit polls, which all seem to switch from Bernie Sanders to the other way. Do we still have a republic in this country?
No, we don't. It's like the late Roman Empire, where we have the facade of the republic. I mean, look at the legislative branch of government. It's completely paralyzed. I mean, the Republican Party, during the impeachment process, refused to endorse the rule of law and impeach Trump, but so did the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party picked the most trivial constitutional violations that Trump committed, with Ukraine and stuff, and ignored the constitutional violations that have been institutionalized by the Democratic Party. What are those? Loss of the right to privacy, wholesale surveillance, the preemptive war, which under international protocols is considered a war crime, a war of aggression. The use of signing statements, Obama's decision to misinterpret the 2002 Authorization to Use Military Force Act as giving the executive branch the right to assassinate American citizens. I mean, this is really frightening.
Right.
All of these constitute, Bruce Fein has a whole list of 12 of them, the constitutional lawyer. They ignored and that's very dangerous because essentially now they've normalized them. So both parties have refused to stand up for the rule of law. And we're going to pay for it. I mean, what they've now given Trump is utter immunity, and we are watching him purge the government, and people are selected for positions of power based solely on personal loyalty, and that is exactly how despotic regimes work.
I want to move to coronavirus, which I feel is exposing something about our American society. It's exposing that the elites have gutted our social services that are meant to help a society get through tough times, get through crises. People don't have proper health care. They can't stay home when they're sick because they don't have a padding to deal with a crisis. Has this pandemic exposed something about our society?
Yeah, we're going to pay for it because we don't have a functioning healthcare system. I mean, even if people have health insurance, the co-pays first of all, we don't have any kits, so we'll start there. But it's an utterly dysfunctional system. And then we have huge pockets. I mean, the homeless population, a virus like this will spread very rapidly. 2.3 million citizens incarcerated, half of whom have never been charged with physically harming another human being. I mean, it's a form of social control against poor people of color trapped in what Malcolm X called internal colonies. You have all these ICE detention centers. The healthcare system, because it is a for-profit system and is about profit, not about health, is crippling the ability to respond to the pandemic. And we don't, if it becomes a pandemic, and we don't know in the United States how many people have it because nobody gets tested. Even people who have it don't get tested.
And poor communities are not going to get tested.
Well, of course, that's what always happens. I mean, they're the ones who are going to bear the brunt of this. I think it's the coronavirus is another way of exposing the dysfunction of the system. And of course, now they're talking about bailouts.
Right.
Well, for who? Not for you and me.
I just saw the
not
headline.
For the low-wage workers who don't get paid if they don't go to work, but for the airline industry. And fracking. Did you say fracking?
He just said we might bail out the fracking industry.
We better save the fracking industry.
It's totally repulsive. And I love how he gets together the heads of the big pharma and everything and says, hey guys, stop behaving the way capitalism tells you to behave. Share your ideas, stop charging as much, stop doing everything that this system has told you to do in order to try and help deal with this crisis. The stock market also going down. People feel there's no real leadership. It seems like the ripple effects of this could go for years to come.
I think so. I think the system is so weak and anemic.
Right.
Of course, the stock market is completely inflated. and it's all speculation, as they don't make anything, they don't produce anything. So the system itself has such a thin shell that it's easily punctured, and I think it's a pretty safe bet that at the very least we're going into a recession. I mean, we've had the biggest drop since 2008, or even larger, right? Yeah. So, things aren't good, and they're not good because corporate power has seized all of the mechanisms of control. We don't control our own economy; it's controlled by global corporatists. We don't control the courts. We don't control the media, certainly the commercial media. We don't control the legislative branches. We don't even control the judges anymore. There are all these ideologues appointed by the Christian right and the Federalist Society. So, number one, it means that as a civil society, we can't deal in an appropriate way with crises like this one. And number two, it means the society is so fragile that it can't take any hits, and it's taken hits. So I'm not very optimistic about where we're headed.
Naomi Klein's shock doctrine laid out how the corporate oligarchs wait for a moment of shock like this in order to exploit it and get plans that they've had long-standing. The big banks have already claimed that the answer to this coronavirus is to deregulate them even more. But is there a reverse side to that? Is there a side where the kind of a positive shock doctrine, where this is a moment for activists in which they can, it's revealing the flaws of the system and they can stand up in a way maybe they're not getting?
The problem is fear. So, and that's how systems like this essentially operated. They've operated this way since 9/11. I mean, the old Cold War was not really about Soviet threat. It was about the fear, the fear factor, which is why we had to build this ridiculously large arms. I mean, nobody ever talks about the military or the arms industry. I mean, where have all our resources gone?
Right.
I mean, technically it's about half of all discretionary spending. But when you count all sorts of other budget items that are effectively defense, you're really talking about $1 trillion. You're talking about a staggering amount of money. And what have we got for our money? The greatest strategic blunder in American history in the Middle East. I mean, an utter debacle to which no politician or general has been held accountable. The squandering of, who knows, $5-7 trillion. I mean, look at that, what that kind of money could have done for the country. So, but fear works. So was fear of terrorists, who were never an existential threat to the United States. They will use the coronavirus, clearly. They'll use anything that induces fear within the population because fear induces paralysis. And you already have among the liberal elites, they're all, not only have they lined up behind Biden, having been out around some of them, but they're dismissing people who continue to support Sanders as obstructionists. So unfortunately, as history has demonstrated over and over, these liberal elites are usually the first to fold. And we don't, the radicals within the country, which have always, pushed forward the kind of social and political agendas that really, in the end, in essence, were adopted by Roosevelt and have defended the common good, have been so shattered and broken. So I would love to say that this is a moment, but I worry that it will all be used to consolidate despotic corporate control.
Yeah, that aspect is terrifying. In these last couple of minutes, I want to shift to Julian Assange, who maybe he'll be saved from coronavirus because he's in a glass cage. But seeing him during his the box they're keeping him in during his own trial, his own extradition hearing, is truly repulsive. Can't even take place in his own trial. You also wrote a recent column about that, and what you said, what's happening to Assange will happen to the rest of us. Can you go into that?
Well, yeah, because there is a provision under the Espionage Act, written in 1917, passed by Woodrow Wilson, which was about giving government secrets to foreign enemies. That it's illegal to hold classified information, but it's never been used against the press. All of us within the press, I worked for the New York Times for 15 years, I published classified information on the front page of the New York Times. But what they've done with Assange, who is a publisher. Remember, he didn't get the documents. They were given to him by Chelsea Manning, who they've now thrown back in jail. And he published them. He's not an American citizen. He's Australian. WikiLeaks is not a US-based publication. I don't understand legally how the Espionage Act can be used against him, but it is. And they want to extradite him and charge him with 17 counts of the Espionage Act, which is 170 years, and then theft of breaking into a government computer, which he didn't do, for another, that's 175 years total. But what that does, and I have to say the mainstream media has belatedly woken up, like the New York Times, that they realize that that sets a legal precedent, which then allows the state, and they will use that precedent to go after anyone, any publication, anywhere that publishes internal government secrets that expose, and as he did, malfeasance, crimes, fraud, lies. Remember, and remember about Assange is that he was bipartisan because he published the Podesta emails, which, what a surprise, Hillary Clinton lies like she breathes, taking $675,000 from Lloyd Blankfein to give 3 speeches, which can only be described as a bribe. So you have both sides of the aisle. They're both
in many countries, not just America.
Yeah. So the Democratic Party establishment, which refuses to accept their own responsibility for NAFTA and destroying welfare and ripping down the firewalls between commercial and investment banks and gutting welfare. Well, it was all Clinton, and of course blaming it on Russia. They live in their own non-reality-based world. It's just a different version from Trump's non-reality-based world.
Is there any chance he won't be extradited, that they'll actually
I don't think so. No, I think it is so fixed. I mean, I was over there, and I'm going back over and I know Julian. I think we have to raise our voices as loudly as we can. I was at all sorts of rallies with George Galloway and others. I skirted the ones with, what's her name, that actress, whatever her name is, the famous one,
Pamela Anderson.
Yeah, I didn't do
Pamela
that.
Anderson.
I'm sure she's very nice, but...
She is a big Assange warrior.
Yeah, but no, I would say not, but we have to do everything we can to raise the alarm, because it really will, I think, be used by the state to snuff out any kind of serious investigative journalism into the inner workings of power.
Chris Hedges, thank you so much for being
thanks,
here.
Lee.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, not at all.
We have to go to a short break, but speaking of Chris Hedges, he wrote the foreword to my new book, Bullet Points and Punchlines. It reveals truths not allowed on your mainstream media. There's so much in there, and it's available at leecampbook.com. Anyway, I'll be right back with Jordan Chariton of Status Coup. Welcome back. I'm still Lee Camp. And here now is my conversation with, he's a great journalist. He's also the creator of the outlet Status Coup, Jordan Chariton. Jordan, thanks for joining me again.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So you've been out there. You're actually on the ground, talking to the people, talking to the voters. What would you say is the top story that our mainstream media is missing?
The top story that our mainstream media is missing
of these elections, of these primaries. Sorry.
The top story, and it's kind of difficult because they don't really cover stories; they just push narratives. But the top story they're missing is the majority of the country is progressive, including the older voters. I mean, it's really bizarre. I mean, you look at these exit polls. Even the older voters that are breaking for Biden are for Medicare for all. I mean, Mississippi was for Medicare for all. Covering on the ground, I speak with a lot of actual door knockers, canvassers for Bernie, for other campaigns, and older people are actually pretty progressive down the issue, but the things that come out of their mouth is essentially regurgitating what Chris Matthews told them. There is a severe gap and really programming of what people believe. These older voters that actually were really the main beneficiaries of the New Deal and the exact policies Bernie's trying to revive are the same ones that have kind of been programmed to think, well, it's not realistic, it's not electable. And the canvassers and even the older voters that I've spoken to, when you actually break it down and explain to them, no, what you've been told is incorrect, they're very swayable. The problem is they're being fed a steady diet constantly of electability and well, Bernie's a nice guy, he means well, but it just won't win in the Midwest.
Yeah, I mean that's what's incredible is you go to, like you're saying, you go down this list of items, of issues, whether it's health care, whether it's minimum wage, whether it's paid sick leave, the environment, and they agree with Bernie Sanders until you say who you're voting for, and then they say, oh, Joe Biden, because I think he's the one that can beat Trump. And it's like, there's no evidence of that, and Biden can't seem to put together two sentences without getting turned around. So this is the guy that's going to beat Trump. It blows the mind that they've been fed that line of talking points. But what?
Yeah, I also think there's an element, Lee, real quick.
Yeah.
It's really, really, really alarming how misinformed people have been. One quick example. My partner, Jen, was just in Michigan for the primary. She went to Flint, Michigan, where Biden had a very, very controlled public event, invite only. She spoke with two nice African-American ladies and said, do you have any concerns that Joe Biden lied about, being arrested in apartheid South Africa, lied about joining in civil rights sit-ins? Had no idea. And it's not their fault. They had no idea, and I would venture to guess the majority of black voters in South Carolina, the Deep South, have not a clue about Joe Biden's flexibility with the truth, and that's part of this information war. People like you, people like me, and other journalists are trying to fight. It's not so much to help Bernie, it's to actually get facts out so people could have an informed opinion when they vote.
Yeah, he was also saying he was raised in the black church recently, which I'm sure played well with black voters. Unfortunately, completely not true. No one's found any evidence of that. But so to get to the actual contest, we've seen a lot of things going on, a lot of media manipulation, manipulation of the vote, the elections in California. They're giving out provisional ballots to anyone who's black or Latino, and really they're just. There's been a lot of various ways to make sure these elections turn out the way the establishment wants them to turn out. What kind of either voter suppression or election manipulation have you seen?
Well, if you start with Iowa, which I was there on the ground, the real question is, judging by the complete, words I can't say here, how do we know what the actual results in 2016 were? This was the first time we actually saw the popular vote in Iowa. Right. But we were seeing, stuff going across Twitter, random people on Twitter finding errors in sheets, tabulations, this and that. So I think it really begs the question, who won Iowa in 2016? You have in Iowa literally them making it up on the fly, these, pledged delegates, state delegate equivalents, which really doesn't mean anything. It's a new invention the DNC came up with. Then in South Carolina, they literally were closing polls the week before and informing people in the newspaper about this. A lot of people in South Carolina, not that Bernie was going to win South Carolina, were going to their polling stations, moved, with no signage even where it was moved to. Then you move to California, which obviously we know what happened there in 2016. You have the Secretary of State is endorsing Joe Biden. This is the person who's supposed to preside over elections, Alex Padilla. They're handing out not just provisional ballots. Now there's a new trick, conditional ballots, which is even worse than provisional ballots, which really doesn't mean anything other than it's not going to get counted. And Los Angeles, which obviously is a massive city, was decided, let's try brand new machines during the Democratic primary, where older voters didn't understand how to use it. A lot of Latino voters I spoke with didn't know how to use it. And there was massive lines because of tech problems with these machines. So whether it's incompetence or just straight up rigging the vote, it's been going on all over the country. So in addition to term limits, getting money out of politics, we need one uniform federal voting system, not state by state. And we also need independent, without federal contracts, oversight of the machines, which you've reported on can be manipulated.
Yeah, I mean, we're the only country that does it this way, and it's a complete catastrophe. And it seems a catastrophe by design. They want it to be this way so that they can say, oh, well, we don't know, but yeah, it looks like Biden won. And I mean, Gray Zone and Code Pink just called for international observers to come. They called, Venezuela needs to send some election observers here to the U.S. to help us out. When you were talking, because a lot of your videos, you're able to get a few precious seconds with, someone working with a campaign, or sometimes even the presidential candidates themselves. What in those seconds where you get to interview these people for your outlet, Status Coup, what do you feel is important? What types of questions do you feel is important to get to them? And what do you feel our mainstream corporate journalists are failing to do? Because they seem to get those moments and never get anything important out of them.
I try to actually get what are people dealing with rather than who's up, who's down, and pushing a narrative. You'd be surprised. I mean, it's a lot of work traveling and doing this work. You'd be surprised just how simple it is to ask, what would it mean if Bernie Sanders won to you? What's on the line for you? That's when you find out what people are really dealing with, what the pulse of the country really is. And the cognitive dissonance created by the corporate media and the narratives that they push versus not just interviewing Bernie Sanders supporters, but you're talking about, interviewing Nina Turner, for example, for Bernie Sanders' campaign, interviewing Cornel West, these types of people. These are voices, even when you hear them in corporate media, they're always on the defense. They're never being asked, what are you seeing out there in the country? What is the gap you're seeing for African Americans? What is the gap you're seeing for young people? What is the lie that corporate media is telling? I remember interviewing Nina Turner, and she had very, very harsh words, for example, for CNN, MSNBC, who were basically pushing this ridiculous narrative of Bernie bros, which was just the ultimate gaslighting of the corporate media to try and suppress a actual growing coalition of young black people, young Latinos, LGBT. Bernie's coalition was very diverse, but they just kept with the Bernie bros narrative. So to me, what I've gotten out of interviewing people is just how deep the economic suffering is out in this country from speaking with actual people, which is a huge gap from the media who's pushing, oh, the economy's booming, unemployment's low, the stock market's high, people are generally happy with the direction of the country.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right that a lot of those actual progressives are put on the defensive before they even get to begin answering the question. And they studied in the debates so far, Bernie Sanders and the other candidates have been asked over 20 times, how are these social programs going to be paid for? Other candidates are asked, how do you think Bernie Sanders is going to pay for these social programs? Meanwhile, there has been not a single question on how to pay for war, so that makes it so that he's always on the defensive trying to explain, oh, well, how are we going to pay for this stuff, rather than let's talk about what's needed. But, he is still fighting. He's not done yet. He's given a speech this week saying he's looking forward to the debate coming up. And if the DNC succeeds, just for a moment, let's entertain this, succeeds at stopping the only remaining progressive candidate, where does that leave things? Do you believe the people you've been talking to out in these states, are they going to come out and support corporate candidate like Joe Biden? Are they ready for that? Will that stand up? Will they stay in line for 3 hours for that?
I think if Joe Biden makes the same mistakes Hillary Clinton did, if Joe Biden picks, let's say, Amy Klobuchar as his vice president, which she slipped up and, Freudian slip, said she looks forward to joining the ticket. If he picks a Kamala Harris, no, I really don't, because, let's be honest, Trump is obviously an unprecedented threat. But when you're a young person, with $200,000 of student loan debt, when you're a young person, very, very passionate about the climate crisis going on, and the establishment basically gives you a middle finger, tells you to fall in line. No, we're not going to ban fracking. No, we're not going to do anything about your student debt. I mean, are you going to go thank them and wait in line for 3 hours? So I also think, honestly, it's not just young people. The Democratic Party is knowingly, and this is a thing that is shameful that the media has not covered. Listen, we're not doctors. Clearly something is cognitively going on with Joe Biden. If Bernie Sanders made one of the 100, any one of the 100 missteps Joe Biden has made, it would be wall to wall. It is news when a candidate forgets the name of the president they served. It is news when a candidate forgets what state they're in, what day it is. That Joe Biden, the media has covered that up rather than covering it. Right. And I think that a lot of young people, but also a lot of independent voters, if they see Joe Biden, losing his train of thought, forgetting things, or worse on a debate stage, I don't know if they're going to come out and vote for that.
In this last minute, I want to jump to another topic. You've done a lot of great reporting on Flint, Michigan. I'm just wondering where Flint stands now.
Thank you for that segue, because I have a massive story coming out probably in the next 2 weeks on exactly that, and it will expose, without getting too much into it, it will expose just who poisoned the people of Flint. Hint, corporate America, privatization, Democrats and Republicans all together in a fun little club. Flint is going on 6 years in April without clean water, and this story will really, really reveal just what exactly is going in Flint and who really was involved in this cover-up.
Well, we look forward to that. Thank you so much, Jordan, for taking the time. Status Coup is the outlet. Keep it up.
Thanks, Lee.
That's the show, but I've decided to premiere my latest stand-up comedy special. This will be the first time it's ever free. It'll be free for a limited time. It's called Not Allowed on American Television, and it'll be this Friday night after Redacted Tonight airs tomorrow. So get the details at leecamp.com. Also, don't forget to download the free RT America app. It's called Portable TV. You can get it at portable.tv/download. It has hundreds of Redacted Tonight episodes and a hell of a lot more. Until next time, good night and keep fighting.